Good morning in Washington. Good afternoon in Europe. My name is John Herbst, and I run the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council. It's been an extraordinary several weeks in Moscow's war of aggression against Ukraine, and for that matter, political developments in the United States which relate to that. And we have a wonderful panel of experts and former officials to discuss this with you. Our panel includes Hanna Hopko, who's the co-founder of the International Center for Ukrainian Victory, and a former chairwoman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Rada, the Ukrainian Parliament. We have Zygimantas Pavilionis, who's a deputy speaker of the Lithuanian Parliament, chairman of the European Affairs Committee. We have Dr. Jeffrey Stacey, a former senior advisor at the U.S. State Department. And we have Minister Andriy Zaharnyuk, former defense minister of Ukraine, and the chairman of the Center for Defense Strategies. So we'll hop right into our conversation. So, Minister Zaharnyuk, last week we saw the withdrawal of the last Russian warship from Crimea, but also the retreat of Ukrainian forces from Krimki on the left bank of the Dnipro River. How is the war going at the moment, in your judgment?
Well, it's obviously extremely tough, and we have two dimensions. We have many dimensions of the war, but the two you mentioned is maritime and land are going quite differently simply because in the in the maritime domain, situation is more or less straightforward. Ukraine keeps on hammering Russian Black Sea Fleet with all kinds of weapons available to us, and that includes obviously the sea drones. That includes some rockets provided and some other weapon systems. And the forecast for Russian Black Sea Fleet is extremely negative. Most likely, it's not going to be present in the Black Sea very soon, and that's a process which is ongoing for over a year and a half now, and unless something significantly politically changes, we don't see the chances for Russia to change the situation dramatically there. On the land, the situation is very different because we are fighting the war in a tactical depth of probably about 0 to 20 to 30 kilometers from the line of contact. That's where most of the weapon systems are working, including drones, including the artillery and other systems. In that depth, from both sides, there is like a massive proliferation of unmanned systems, the massive proliferations of other long-range firepower equipment, and basically there is like a constant battle. Let me put it this way: the combat engagements of yesterday. We had around over 70s from what I remember, and then it's tens per day of significant engagements. By the way, I have to say we publish daily reports still starting from 16th of February 2022 every single day from the front in English language, available in Substack for free. So lots of journalists subscribe, so please go ahead. But based on our sources, we do see the attempts of Russians to press through Kharkiv region, obviously, and the Donbas region, and then in the south. But most of all, the Kharkiv and Donbas. This strategic goal for the near future remains exactly the same. It's basically to stretch Ukrainian defense forces, and then to occupy this Donetsk region entirely. And as before, Russians are losing, again, new record numbers of people. You may have seen these were statements from British intelligence, but obviously we can confirm them that, again, for the last couple of weeks, there's been a record numbers of Russians lost per day. So that's well over 1,000. And generally, their current tactic remains pretty much similar. They just scale it. So basically sending people with human waste to die and then report about like occupation of some village which they destroyed before with gliding bombs and artillery. That's basically the only thing they can do. But they seem to be relatively okay with this tactic, at least for the moment, and they're trying to keep on with this. Ukraine, of course, it's very clear what Ukraine had to do in this case, but unfortunately, Ukraine doesn't have means because the engagement of the more of the deeper layers of the front line. So basically deeper, bigger depths of the battlefield zone. That would be the answer. So we would be talking about again, missiles and some UAVs and aviation and so on. But at the moment, Ukraine doesn't have a chance to do that in many cases. Either technically or legally, we all know that the United States weapons and some other weapons are provided with the limitations of they could be used. For that, as I said, the war is basically, most of the engagements are happening in the tactical depths, which is not that good, and from the forecast and generally from the course of war. So essentially that's where we are on land. And of course, there's been a whole different activities done in order to get out of this paradigm of the tactical and purely land paradigm, but it's too early to say, about some results. But we see some developments right now.
Thank you. Wonderful. Ms. Hopko, you were in DC for the 75th anniversary NATO summit, which featured modest steps to enhance the Ukraine-NATO relationship, a new world irreversible to describe Ukraine's movement towards membership, some significant arms supply announcements, and the unveiling of security pacts with a large number of countries. What was your assessment of the summit and its meaning for Ukraine?
Thank you so much. Of course, we had low expectations before NATO summit in Washington, D.C. After Vilnius summit, when we thought that formal invitation to Ukraine will be a sign of NATO learning the lessons from Bucharest summit back in 2008. So, but it's really important to be very honest. And especially after Washington, D.C. summit, NATO summit, on my way back to Ukraine, I saw some passengers in the business class flying from D.C. to Frankfurt. I was sitting in economic class and discussing with other colleagues about the future of Ukraine and what we heard in D.C. Some people were telling us, Ukraine is on fire. Ukraine is on fire, and you are managing the fire, and we are helping you. Sitting in the plane, I was thinking that Ukraine, as an economy class passengers, there are business class passengers thinking that their house is not on fire, and helping with a little means, delaying weapon supply to stop the fire. So my message is that it's not Ukraine house is on fire. We are all on the same plane, and it doesn't matter you are economy or business class passengers. So if you do not help us faster to defeat Russian imperialism, which is back with supplied with the resources from China, North Korea, Iran, so our plane, Europe, and other interconnected regions like Indo-Pacific will be on fire. So also the policy of having a bridge to NATO was met with extremely high skepticism, both among Ukrainian delegation and among NATO members supporting Ukraine, because this bridge is interpreted as a nice way to avoid serious discussion on steps needed to help Ukraine to defeat Russia and actually to bring Ukraine to NATO. Also, after Vilnius summit, this idea of bilateral security agreements, which are not become security guarantees. And I think there were also many discussions about potential negotiations with Russia, a kind of ceasefire plan. And for me, this is really a nightmare, because after more than 10 years of Russian aggression against Ukraine, so it's really important to avoid falling into Russian trap, because Ambassador Herbst, you might remember Minsk I, Minsk II, all this peaceful settlement agreement. So actually Ukraine engaged in more than 200 rounds of negotiations with Russia, but unfortunately this didn't prevent it, the full-scale war in February 2022, which became a genocide against Ukraine. So I think among our Western partners, there are, I could say, two camps. One is a coalition of willing, coalition of justice, which understands that only Ukrainian victory is and Russian military defeat, this is the way to sustainable peace. And there are second camp which consider that this war is unwinnable, so it's a time to sacrifice Ukraine and start discussing with Russia about what. So I think it's very dangerous because 10 years ago, it was just Russia alone invading Ukraine. Now it's Russia with, as State Secretary Blinken said during his speech at NATO Public Forum, 70% of machineries that Russia is receiving, it's from China. 90% of microelectronics is also from China. Also, Russia received more munition and shells from North Korea than all Western partners managed to provide Ukraine. So at stake, it's NATO future. And without a historic decision, like bringing Ukraine to NATO, not saying, let's talk about Ukraine membership after the war ends. I think inviting Ukraine to NATO, this will help to end the war faster. But being afraid or thinking that this is too escalatory, it provokes a more appetite. But now, not just in Russia alone, but also with Russia, in Russia, China, North Korea, Iran. So this is my like summary. We are all on the same plane. It's not Ukraine house is on fire. So the faster we act, the more we together prevent fire in Indo-Pacific or Middle East or other theaters.
Ms. Hopko, that's a very fine metaphor. Well done. Okay, Mr. Pavilionis, you have been one of the most outspoken politicians in Europe for a much stronger Western response to the Russian aggression in Ukraine, as well as moving quickly towards Ukraine membership in NATO. Your thoughts too on the NATO summit last week, actually 2 weeks ago.
Thank you. I think I will continue this tradition of being outspoken because I'm honestly very sad because I think we are going to be defeated with this kind of policy, and I will explain why. While Ukrainian friend in the very beginning, he said about tactical battles only. Why? Because we do not have a strategy from Washington, D.C. We don't have a leadership in Washington, D.C. We don't have a will to defeat NATO enemy number one. And that's a big problem. Let's start from why we have this situation. Yes, replying directly to the question of our discussion, we have this stalemate because of huge polarization in Washington, D.C. This 8-month Hollywood drama on the Hill, costed many lives and led Russians to dig in. And actually, this is because of polarized House and Washington. But it's not only this. When you have a Washington that is not able to define its end game and strategy of victory, not as long as it takes, but as long as it takes to get victory, then you have China and Russia taking the lead. Maybe you noticed during your conventional dramas and other dramas in Washington, D.C. or in other cities that so-called presidency Prime Minister Orban is making trips to Moscow and Beijing. He's selling some kind of peace plan that is, for me, very much Putin's and Chinese plan. And maybe you also noticed that actually today we have a foreign minister of Ukraine in China. The general mood is in Europe that Americans are so weak, they are so divided, that they are willing to end this game on the terms of Russians and Chinese. And they will feed the Hitler of modern years for the third time. I'm deliberately mentioning it because you remember what happened with Hitler. First, the West agreed that he's taking the Rhineland, then Austria, and then Sudetenland. So we fed Putin with Georgian occupation. We did nothing at all. That was exactly the lame duck period in America. I remember going to Washington and asking Dan Fried what's happening. He said, sorry, Bush is done, Obama is coming. The lame duck period, remember, it's exactly the period that is coming now. Then we fed Hitler for the second time in 2014. We more or less did nothing. Well, again, peace negotiations. So if Washington of today is preparing this peace on Russian or Chinese terms, if Orban is allowed to move with nothing happens from American side, so we will soon, I think, as we hear, till inauguration on January 20, we will have third time kind of Russian peace. That will mean that we are entering the serious war. And it will not only be Ukrainians, it will be Poles and Baltics and the whole Europe. And it means then, because of lack of leadership of Washington, Washington is now in front of our eyes, is creating Afghanistan #2, but this time in Europe. So, okay, this was the drama. Now I want to suggest you the solving of that drama. You know, guys, you just follow Europeans. You just watch what is happening in Brussels. We just re-elected wonderful Christian democratic family in Brussels, led by my family, led by Ursula von der Leyen, who was just approved as a leader of our government in Brussels. The main theme of her is to have defense as #1 priority. And we started accession talks with Ukrainians in the mean of, while you've been fighting your Hollywood dramas in Washington. So first of all, I hope that Americans are not selling Ukraine till inauguration. Keep that at least after inauguration, January 20. Immediately engage with Europeans. Immediately engage with all European leaders who are absolutely united. Start accession process to NATO. Hannah was absolutely right. You know, I was in Bucharest 16 years ago when American President Bush promised that Ukraine will be NATO member. I was behind Hillary Clinton in Chicago NATO summit in 2012 when Hillary said, next summit, we will of course do it in next summit. It takes already 12 years after that promise. So Bush promised it 16 years, Hillary promised it 12 years ago. In Vilnius, we failed with that. We were asking President Biden to do it. He didn't show that courage and leadership. In Washington, the same happened. So we Europeans, we started accession talks. We started to finance our defense like Lithuanians, 3% annually. So what Americans do now, if you don't have a will to lead, at least follow Europeans. Start accession process to NATO. Make a clear sign to Russians that there is an end game to that you have a plan. Then allow Ukrainians to use your weapons everywhere. It's a waste of your taxpayers' money. If you still complain that you are giving a lot of money to Ukrainians to defend, though 80% of that money is going back to your factories. So please allow those weapons to be used effectively. Because if not, my dear friends, we will have Afghanistan #2. You will have Europe conquered by Russians and Chinese, and then just wait for new Pearl Harbor that will happen with you because of your weakness, because of your non-leadership, that will happen in Taiwanese Straits. Then you will say, oh my God, we didn't listen to those Baltic states. Oops, we made it again. So you better listen now and do the right things like Ukrainians and Lithuanians are telling to you.
To be honest, I'm glad to see you've mellowed. Thank you. All right. Dr. Stacy,
Yes.
just to switch things a little bit, this has been a very unusual presidential campaign here in the United States. First, we had the assassination attempt against Donald Trump, Now Joe Biden has announced that he is withdrawing from the race. At this late date, a month before the Democratic Party convention, we do not know. Well, actually, we do know who the candidate will be, Kamala Harris. What impact will the Biden withdrawal have on U.S. policy towards Russia's war in Ukraine, if any?
Thank you, John, and colleagues. Allow me to perhaps add a little dose of optimism to my colleagues' comments, which I second across the line. It is highly important for the U.S. to step up and get back to its customary leadership. I accept these criticisms. Having been a former U.S. official, along with John, I was in the State Department with him. And the good news is several things. First of all, Kamala Harris is rock solid on her support for Ukraine, rock solid. And in case you haven't heard, she just had record fundraising totals. She already achieved a majority in delegates. She will be the Democratic nominee. It's extraordinarily a game changer of game changers. So this bodes incredibly well for Ukraine, Russia, our alliances, everything across the board. And there's a small element to this that, Zig, especially your comments pertain to President Biden, who has 6 more months now. And while he, sort of plays a minor role in the campaign trail supporting his vice president to succeed him, this bodes well also for his legacy thoughts. And folks like John and myself are doing a lot of publishing, encouraging both privately and publicly our administration principals to do the right thing. So when it comes to Lloyd and Tony and Jake and their deputies, I personally have been in touch with them recently on the glide bombs, as the former defense minister just talked about earlier. But in Lithuania, I'm glad to see you have a German brigade with 100 Leopard tanks on the way. So this is really quite something. And the latest NATO exercise, the largest we've ever seen, a clear signal to Vladimir Putin. So we have 2 people who are really kind of shaking in their boots globally these days. One is Donald Trump and the other is Vladimir Putin. And I will underline this very clearly. There are no guarantees. I don't have a crystal ball, but I think we can almost look forward to the Democrats holding the Senate and taking the House. Now, this means very secure Ukraine funding. But even before that, a bigger priority for Joe Biden, I will say, along with the UK, France, and Germany in particular, are lifting all restrictions on the use of their weapons by our Ukrainian friends and colleagues to target inside Russia with no restriction at all. In particular, using the Scalp, the Storm Shadow, the Taurus, which we still need from Germany, and the ATACMS long-range missiles from the US. So we've got incredible efforts from the Czech initiative in terms of armaments and calls from the top of the Czech government to increase the pace of this. So we should expect the fact that now Russia is, as our colleague mentioned a little earlier, essentially unable to effect dramatic change on the battlefield in terms of both soldiers, their numbers of them, and ammo shortages to go with it. So my top concern is not only dealing with the glide bombs via the method that I just recommended, but also, obviously, we've got to do something about the F-16s as they arrive. And the smartest thing, the Poles have basically volunteered or are starting to think about, they say, of shooting down Russian missiles over Ukrainian territory. Even better than that would be to park the F-16s in Poland. But a summation on the optimism coming out of the US, we expect Kamala Harris to do very well. and we expect the Russian funding, along with developments 3.5 months, to be rock solid for Ukraine.
Okay, Dr. Stace, thank you very much. Minister Zaharniuk, we've seen Western estimates, as you mentioned, of Russian casualties approaching 500,000. And The Economist just published an article suggesting that Russia is running out of tanks and artillery. What is your assessment of the current battle readiness of Russian forces? Are they in a position to continue the offensive operations in the north, around and towards Kharkiv, and in Donbass?
Thank you, sir. So let me answer this with the connection of the topic of the meeting, U.S. politics and influence, because these issues are very much interrelated.
Indeed.
So currently, to our understanding, of course, Russia's casualties are higher than that. We're talking about 570 almost right now, rather than 500. But that's, believe it or not, but 70,000 is it kind of seems not like a big deal, despite of like it would be horrible in any other war. But because what Russians are doing, they are sacrificing their people in order to keep the optics of success. And they are currently keeping the optics of success quite well. They're actually leading in the information war in Europe and in the United States, because most of the people believe that they're actually doing not bad and actually progressing. Their progress is incremental, it's non-strategic. They absolutely don't have any capabilities right now. I will underline this right now, because things may change right now for the strategic success. But at the same time, their strategic success may come from some other angle. So it may come from agreement of territory for peace, for instance, or their strategic success may come from the some other type of the arrangement, or long ceasefire, stuff like that, where they would be able to actually create a critical mass of capabilities, weapons, people, etc., in order to change the tide to their favor. Right now, as of now, they are spending everything they make in the front. Front is as long as 1,500 kilometers, which is quite very long, and they are losing it extremely fast. And yeah, so the strategic success at this setup is impossible. The problem is very different. The problem is that we're not moving to the victory right now. With the current paradigm of the war, we are actually moving to, I wouldn't say defeat, but we're moving into extremely serious strategic crisis. And that crisis is actually is exactly against why Western nations are supporting us, because Western nations supporting Ukraine for kind of two main reasons. One, of course, it's a humanitarian reason, because they don't want to see people suffer and so on, and there is a solidarity with a democratic nation and so on, which is extremely appreciated. But there is another reason, and that reason is precedential value of this war. So that war is creating a historic precedent. And this, if you look at the old speeches of everyone, including General Secretary of NATO, US President, all European leaders, they all continuously state that they support Ukraine because of that historic precedent. They cannot allow Russia to succeed. Well, right now, we're not moving in a direction where Russia fails strategically, visibly, and dramatically. Right now, we have problems with the limitations on use, and my colleagues already mentioned that. Limitations on use of weapons. We're talking about the shortage of medium-range weapons. We're talking about serious problems with the specifications of the tactical aviation, which is going to be provided, and so on. And I sincerely hope that we will fix that. Instead, of course, we sometimes hear from some politicians some completely different statements. For example, that they will suggest that Ukraine has to trade some territories for peace, which is naive at best, because it's not the war about territory. It's not the war about Donbass. It's not the war about Kharkiv region. It's not the war about 10 or 15 villages. And to think that if we offer some territory to Putin for peace, he will take it and there will be peace, is just a complete misunderstanding of everything which is happening here. like total misunderstanding. And that's very dangerous because we have a lot of people supporting that statement, saying like, okay, that war is not going in the right direction. Let's just stop it with negotiations. Let's offer something to Russians and they will stop. The war is not going into the right direction because we still don't have a common strategy. It's probably the first war in the history of mankind where we spend so much money and have such serious casualties without the strategy from the Allied side. And secondly, if we decide to stop it, it absolutely doesn't mean that Putin will stop it. Well, most likely he will actually continue. He will pocket whatever is offered, and then they will continue. We can just look back, as Anna suggested, to Minsk agreements and all those 10 years of history. It must teach us something. So while Russians still struggling with the strategic capabilities, which they don't have at the moment, they're trying to ramp up their production. They're trying to mobilize more people. They're trying to train more sources. So they know about those shortcomings. It's not like a secret for them, obviously. But while they don't have, and they will not have in the nearest future, the strategic capability to destroy Ukraine as a whole, we need to make learn our lessons, and change the paradigm of this war. If we just keep going as we're going, that with us. We keep on saying this to them on all levels, ministerial, parliamentary, expert level, and so on. But please, it's time to make that decision, because it's just unless we make it, I mean, the responsibility for the future generations will be just ridiculous. I'm not talking about Ukrainians, and I'm not even talking about Eastern Europeans. I'm talking about real possibility of the World War III and a complete destruction of the security architecture of the world as we know it. Because all other nations will look at Russia and say, if they can, why we cannot? And that's quite obvious. Why we should repeat that, I have no idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Hopko, there are reports that President Zelensky had a good phone call with President Trump. In addition to that, as we know, Trump seemed to have given at least an amber light to Speaker Johnson to move the aid package to a vote last April. All this suggests that the fears that Trump would impose an unjust peace on Ukraine may be misplaced. Is Ukraine ready to deal with either President Trump or President Harris?
So I think Ukrainian people respect the choice of American nation. So it's your choice, your responsibility, and actually, I think that victory of Ukraine should not depend on who will become a next president of the US. And within this almost 11 years of Russian aggression, Ukraine learned a lot from working with Democratic leaders and Republican when Trump was president. So I think for us, it's really important to talk about American leadership and responsibility as a security guarantor to Ukraine when we give up the third largest nuclear arsenal. Because now when we see that China for Republican Party is considered as the biggest threat than Russia. So I think without defeating Russian imperialists in Ukraine, American credibility is at stake. Your partners in Indo-Pacific will start asking questions. Is America able to counter, to prevent threats from China in Indo-Pacific without not succeeding in Ukraine? So if US want to see a success story, Ukraine is the right place to go. And I fully support what Mr. Pavlionis just said, that it's already 10 years from attempt of illegal annexation of Crimea when Russia invaded Ukraine back in 2014. It was Obama time. Then within this 11 years, we've seen many attempts to help Ukraine, but never we've seen a victory strategy. So this is the key problem, how to convince, how to provide arguments that Ukrainian victory is an American victory in the European continent. And it's really crucially important. Plus, Ukraine with the modern technologies which we are producing ourselves with our partners, so we could contribute to NATO, and NATO could become a real power with different deterrence instruments, having Ukraine as a member, because the strategic value of Ukraine in NATO is our people, is our unique combat experience with the usage of drones with artificial intelligence, electronic warfare. And also, I think when we are talking about economic dimension of European security, NATO as a military alliance, but also all infrastructure, 3C initiatives, and ports and other connectivity issues. This is how we could contribute. So I think we learned a lot of lessons within this 11 years, and he is here to explain American decision makers that Russian defeat will not trigger many problems as they are afraid of. Instead, self-limitation, not giving Ukraine enough weapon, because the morale of our soldiers and actually must be backed by modern equipment and timely assistance from our partners. We need stable supply of all types of weapons and ammunition in larger quantities, like ATACMS, F-16, and lift restrictions on striking on the military objects in the Russian territory. So I think this is what we want to see from the US. Not fear, but not fear of escalation or fear of Russian defeat, which might trigger a scenario of Russian disintegration. And I understand this is what makes some people at NSC and White House really afraid of. But I think now the situation is really very bad. And we are thankful for everything we are receiving. But my message, don't request from Ukraine to be too much thankful, to express gratitude, when we need more, and at stake is European and global security and American credibility. So this is why I think Ukraine is prepared for American choice. So, but I think the issue is how to convince that victory of Ukraine is in American national interest, in your economy, in your global perspective of the vision of the future of democracy, or also Ukraine is a country rich with critical strategic minerals, a lot of them in the occupied territories. We don't want to give a chance to China and Russia to extract them and to use for critical technologies. So I think Ukraine as a hub of defense industries in Europe located in Ukraine will be a value also for United States and your industries and your economy in the future. So this is, we don't want to interfere even by commenting your elections, because we have this painful experience previously when we were like a ball using in your domestic football and political games. So no, but I think it's really important to see the competition between two parties who deliver and provide more resources to Ukraine, and who will finally, like Roosevelt-type legacy, the empire should be defeated. So Russian imperialism with axis of evil states, with 4 horses of apocalypse, they should feel the strength of US, your leadership as a superpower. What is now, like, people are really asking the questions.
Thank you. I'm going to switch the order for the last 2 questions. And so, Ms. Pavlionis, you'll be the get the last question. So we're coming to you, Dr. Stacy. This follows off of what Ms. Hopko was just saying. You, Dr. Stacy, have spoken out regularly about the need for a bolder U.S. policy to help Ukraine turn the tide. What should Biden do in the next 6 months to make this happen? And please, 3 minutes so we have time for audience questions.
Yes, indeed. Well, I second Parliamentarian Hopko's comments 100%. Both Ukrainian colleagues, I think we're all in agreement here. And the very first step, obviously, is to lift all remaining restrictions on Western weapons across the board of any kind. This is what will deal with the glide bombs problem right away. This is the #1 priority. We get this done in a week, and we need to. I'm doing everything that I can, personally, professionally, in this context, publishing private messages to get this done now. And then we have to absolutely have a victory strategy, as my colleagues have just pushed for. And I think President Biden is now thinking about this primarily. He's going to get his deal on Gaza, but what he really, I think, is going to want to be known for is defeating Vladimir Putin alongside Ukraine. And that means moving right away to getting 155mm shells going, to getting the F-16s over there and more of them, and not just 4th generation fighter jets, but 3rd generation. We've got to get the French planes there. We've got to get the Swedish planes there. We've got to get the Eurofighter Typhoon there. Let's do these things immediately instead of waiting, as my colleagues have just called for. Let's have a victory strategy indeed. What else can we do? We can make sure that the F-16s are essentially used strategically. So we ought to plan for 2, not 1 counteroffensive, but 2. And we'll do it with the air power and with pushing on the ground with each of these things that we've been discussing. So once morale is incredibly important. Morale of soldiers increases when they've got long-range missiles flying over the heads at Russian targets inside Russian territory. So let's not forget that key element as well. But I also agree, NATO accession talks, just starting them and talking about a future NATO command, in Kyiv, which will focus on what we are learning from the Ukrainians in the lead. It should be a UAV command, sea drones, air drones, jamming, all of it. Our Ukrainians know more about this than anybody in the world. So let's give hope for the future by starting NATO accession talks. Let's talk about creating a Ukrainian command for NATO. Let's get all restrictions lifted. Let's get the Taurus missile out of Germany, for goodness sakes. There are some discussions in Berlin about having, cutting in half their Ukrainian. No way. So we need Joe Biden now to step up, and let's have an announcement within the week with British, French, and German and Czech colleagues for lifting all restrictions, adding the Taurus missile to the mix, getting these extra fighters moving. And then let's use the very helpful planning that, a lot of top secret details about the targeting and what's going on in the pod, there where the US and others are helping our Ukrainian friends, even on targeting, on strategy, on battle plans, etc. Let's plan for 2 counteroffensives supported with long-range missiles, all the aerial support needed, and then the big push, to make up for the failed counteroffensive last year. Let's get all of this done. President Biden, let's cement your legacy, the legacy of all our foreign policy principles across the alliance. Let us draw a line in the sand and make sure that this is a new era. This will deter China as well. We know that the Chinese went to town when, the president that John and I served, basically had such a weak response, just like George Bush did. And I hammered Steve Hadley for this later.
Okay. Jeff, please finish up.
Line it up there. Good luck, Ukraine. Viva Ukraine.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Pavilionis, we've already had Hannah and Andrei talk about the peace plan, which Orban has been pushing. There were rumors that Washington was looking at this, but they've been denied by the administration. How dangerous is this peace plan? And also, do you think that bold Ukrainian move to cut off Russian oil and gas to Slovakia and Hungary might chasten Orban? Please, 3 or 4 minutes. And unmute.
Sorry for that. So to your question, to what would be done, I would add just one word to the big speech of Kamala Harris in Chicago. As long as victory takes. Please add word, not as long as it takes, because it's bullshit. It means another Russian peace, another ceasefire that would mean Russian tanks in my town, Vilnius, in 5 years. A victory. Because it's a joke when I, Lithuanian, representing 3 million, okay, another million in Chicago, is asking you to lead. You know, it's a joke when I, Lithuanian, you know, united Europe for invitation to NATO of Ukrainians. Just Scholz was not with me, but it was America to say no. America should lead. This is why we revolted in Vilnius. You know, you have intelligence, you have it all. You can have a comprehensive plan of victory. So if you want to win those elections, if you want to get votes in Chicago, that is the most Lithuanian city in America, most Polish, most Ukrainians, add this word and lead in a way you want. Because I want to remind Democrats, if something happens, because we hear those signals about talks going on secretly, you remember, you know, what people remember about Afghanistan. They do not remember a lot of troops who died there, a lot of money that was, they will remember defeat. If Democrats will allow defeat till January 20th, with kind of excuse that, wow, Trump might come and we can do nothing, it's a lame duck period, because lame duck is most dangerous period, as you know from Georgian occupation example. So please show your strategic muscle, because, you should also remember that in the soul of Ukrainians, Lithuanians, Poles, and all Central European coalition, it's because of Yalta we died. In our souls, we all remember Roosevelt. And you also should remember from your history that Roosevelt waited for 43 meeting in Casablanca when he finally decided to annihilate Hitler. So this time, if Ukrainian loses, it will not be because of Ukrainian, lack of resources. Russians will never defeat Ukrainians on the front line. It will be because of betrayal in Washington and in NATO capitals, mostly in Washington. So it will be your responsibility, because Ukrainians will never be defeated on the front lines, but it might be defeated in NATO capitals. And it's being defeated now. So it will be your historic responsibility. So if Biden, instead of being a hero that saved Ukrainians, he don't want to be remembered as Roosevelt #2, he better discusses it with Kamala and adds one word: victory. Because we might remember you from other side. Most of Lithuanians still now in America vote for Republicans because of Roosevelt. So if Biden wants to change that trajectory, add the word victory, invite Ukraine to NATO, and give them all weapons, without any caveats that gentleman from America was just saying. Defeat Putin, because it's an axis of evil that is targeting not Ukrainians, not Lithuanians or Poles. It's targeting American leadership. China is the biggest supporter of Russia in the war. Why they do it? Because they hate you and they want to annihilate your leadership. Think about that before it's not too late.
Okay, thank you. Let's turn to at least get 1 or 2 audience questions.
Here.
We have a question from Seobhan. Is a recent poll shows a marked increase in the percent of Ukrainians supporting peace negotiations with Russia. What does this indicate about the trajectory of the war, and should it impact U.S. policy? Ms. Hopko.
So I think this particular survey, but if you ask my friends who are in the battlefield, former MPs, who joined the parliament after the Dignity Revolution and now in the battlefield, So people understand that we all in Ukraine, more than 86%, we want to see justice. So we need to see Russian defeat, but actually these delays with weapon, lack of strategy from our American partner as a strategic one. So this is also which like fueling this mood that if we are alone, we'll keep fighting with Russians without a clear message that US stands with us until we defeat Russia together. So this is also very deteriorating the morale of soldiers. And I think especially when we are preparing for the winter season, many Ukrainians from the frontline oblasts, frontline regions, they are asking the questions why US is not allowing Poland, Romania to make in sophisticated way the air defense shield over Western Ukraine and Odessa, because we expect 4 or 5 million of Ukrainians which might to flee frontline regions seeking more secure places. So I think besides restrictions of lifting restrictions of targeting Russian military objects, it's also important to help Ukraine to protect our Western regions from the sky, allowing actually, how to say, find a legal solution to allow Western warplanes to intercept Russian missiles over Ukraine. So I think it's also in the NATO interest, especially when we are talking about vital energy security of NATO states. So this is really important, and just to support what Mr. Pavilionis said, unfortunately, from ceasefire agreement back in 2014, Minsk till 2024, we haven't seen this victory strategy. And the success of the West would have been happened if we prevent the genocide that Russia started to commit back in 2022. So sustainable peace without making Russia accountable for war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, forceful deportation of kids. So I think if US want to demonstrate leadership, so it's about helping Ukraine to defeat Russia. And actually all these delays is unexplainable. How we could explain why it takes years for Biden administration to adopt decisions which are so important for not just for survival of Ukraine.
Thank you. I think, Andrei, you wanted to say something as well here.
Yes, I would love to say, because the question is quite tricky, and it's pretty much around in the information space, and it basically creates a false dilemma. There is no such real dilemma as, okay, what would you choose? A peace with Russia, but to give up some territory, or war with Russia? That dilemma is actually wrong. And the people who put that question to people, either they don't understand that or they're putting this on purpose, it doesn't matter. But they're actually asking them a question which doesn't have the right answer. Because it's not about the war. So offering territory to Putin is not going to stop the war. The question which people are answering is that, okay, so what would you prefer? Endless fighting, or give up some territory, some villages, some towns, but have a peace? And lots of people say, yeah, I would rather give peace, because I would rather choose peace because I don't want people dying, and so on and so on. But there is no such question in real life. Unfortunately, there is no such dilemma in real life. And that's what we need to understand. Dilemma is constructed, it's manipulative, and unfortunately does not represent anything what is in reality, particularly strategic intents of Putin.
Okay, thank you very much. We're at the witching hour, so we're done. My apologies, especially to Jack Kupansky, had a bunch of very good questions, which we did not have time to ask our panelists. And thank you to all our panelists for being with us. We'll be doing more on this, of course, in the weeks and months to come. Wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Slava Ukraini!
Героям слава.